Hello, I'm Eddie of Jaguar Games, and joining me today is our founder, Javier Rayon, and our incredible guest, Gonzalo Frasca from Uruguay. Welcome, Gonzalo. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation for our web show and podcast. It's been a while we to to get you to organize this and to chat with you, but we're like so thrilled to have you here.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Hi, Gonzalo, and yes, I had to tell everybody that I was hunted down and successfully because it took a while to get me, but I'm really happy to be here.
But
Thanks so
yeah,
much again for being here. I believe that's what we're constantly doing, right? As Latino City, we're constantly, like you're doing, looking for interesting people pursuing us, and it's impressive. Even though we'd love to hear about your work, Gonzalo, sometimes it takes a lot of effort for us Latinos to meet each other, to discuss the very interesting work that fortunately is happening. So maybe we can start with yourself, Gonzalo, telling us a bit about what you're doing, the kind of work that you do.
Sure. Well, I can go backwards. I'm currently working at R&D and research and development at Kahoot. Yeah, people know Kahoot for quiz games, and well, I'm creating new stuff there, and I'm really excited that well, soon to be released stuff. So I'll be thrilled later to share with you. But it's basically about micro learning, or even more than micro learning, it's nano learning. It's we're building 2-minute lessons that work on any phone for learning pretty much everything in a playful way. So I've been a game designer for a long time. More recently, the last, I would say, 8-9 years, I've been focusing on learning. But before that, I basically was focusing on creating games for animated TV shows and movies for Hollywood. I mean, Cartoon Network, Disney, Pixar, Warner Brothers, Lucasfilm, basically web games, pretty large web games by the standards, and in the early 2000s. And yeah, I mean, and also I'm a researcher. Well, I'm not sure if I can tell. I'm a researcher still. I guess, yeah. I do work at research and development, but not at academic. At least I'm not affiliated with a university yet, but still. But I got my PhD in video games in Copenhagen at ITU University. So I also got my my master's, which was about political video games at Georgia Tech with Janet Murray. So I've done quite a lot of stuff. I'm happy to both in the creation and also on the thinking of games. And well, I mean, I'm still enjoying myself and sharing the joy of helping people to have fun and, well, spend some time and maybe even learn something.
Exactly. So in that sense, very quickly, we can tell a bit about what we're doing, because Eddie is just as excited as me. In Jaguar Games, we also believe that you can have fun and you can learn at the same time. So in our case, we're combining what indigenous people have told us, what academics are finding, in this case, about the Aztec Empire. So we're doing something like a Resident Evil set in the Aztec Empire. But the interesting advantage is that we believe by combining these different expertises, we can have something that stands out. It would be far easier to just have the stereotypes, like Indians versus the colonizers. And
right. But is Tlaloc there? Because he's my favorite god.
Of course, Tlaloc is going to appear.
Okay,
yeah.
If Tlaloc is there, then I'm happy.
We're currently actually prototyping a cenote, a beautiful, gorgeous cenote,
cool.
because
let's dive in there.
Exactly. But tragically, maybe not only on the consumer side, but even developers sometimes don't know about this interesting collaboration that can happen between academics, such as yourselves, and developers like ours, where sometimes there's always, every day I hear the complaint, but why do you want to research? Why do you want to read on the research from academics or ask indigenous people? Why don't you just make all the decisions and just develop as fast as possible?
Just wing it.
Yeah, just wing it. And that's why it is very important to hear from you experts. Why do you think that games can do more than just ship as fast as possible? Why do you think that's necessary? Any of you, if you'd like to answer.
Cool. Well, I can I can start if you want. Games are still very expensive to do, and that's probably one of the reasons why we're shipping fast, because they're very complex and very hard to do. They're getting easier, but also bigger. But I'm more excited about the getting easier part, because now it's easier for a smaller group to build something with a larger impact. So that's the good news. But it's important to research well first, for many reasons, I think. I mean, I don't know about your game, but I'm curious about it, and I have a few questions I may ask later. But of course, if you're making, as you said, okay, just another Resident Evil, like the one that was set in Spain, where the zombies will say weird Spanish sounding words, and that's
which are very
it.
funny for us Spanish speakers,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
it was a bit hilarious. It happens on the movies too. So if that's the case, well, then it's just basically not a sugar code, but like a culture code of
Yeah, it's just painting
random.
over it. Yeah.
Right, right. But if not, then what's interesting, even if the gameplay can be, I mean, I don't believe that a very complex simulation is less of a game than a more simple gameplay.
Yeah.
But I do think that if you are interested, and it doesn't have to be the case, but if you are interested, for example, in conveying the complexities of an empire like the Mexica, then you have to understand that we're talking about actual people, not just pixels, and we're talking about an actual culture, and we're talking about current situations too, even if it's set in the past. So that definitely requires that you cannot wing a game like that. You have to research, you have to talk to people, to involve, and get different viewpoints, even though you might end up taking your own, but at least because if your canvas is very large, then
Sure.
you're
never end.
responsible. Yeah, but you're responsible for what's in it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And in that sense, Eddie, do you feel that there's more and more of this collaboration? Fortunately, you are, I believe, one of the clear examples of how academics are getting their hands dirty with entertainment. What thoughts you have there?
Actually, I was thinking about this game because I was doing some research about it for a conference that just like ended like last week, that was about Arctic indigenous communities. And I was doing some research and found out, well, didn't found out, I knew about this game a long time before. But what pops in my mind is the Sami indigenous culture. And here in Finland, where I'm based, they have this game that is called Escapma, and it deals with the Sami culture and the Sami indigenous community. And it tells a story about like someone like finding or like fighting like a disease or kind of like a pandemic something, and trying to save the tribe and all of that. That's as far as I haven't played the game that much, but that's like the summary. But I have talked and met like the developers, and they told me like the process of like making this game, and it's not as easy as just like having a story and just like sugar coated like with like some, I don't know, cultural stereotypes or cultural imagery or something. Like, no, they did the actual work. They had to they did like some research, talked with these people, hired a script writer that was like had some Sami background, and that person had to do also more research. So they put all of these things in the game, and when they release it on the impact and the perception or like the critique that it had, the game felt authentic, you know, and it had done like representation and authenticity right, because in a video game or like in any fictional work, I mean, you take some liberties at the end, right, to tell your story.
Yeah.
But you can always like try to be as authentic as possible, because obviously like in a video game, as soon as you have this idea, as soon as you know that it's a video game, I mean, you die, right? And you get to repeat, restart a game, and it breaks the reality. It's not, yeah, you know, it's a video game, but like, but there are ways to do it, you know, to convey that, okay, I mean, yeah, this is like a fictional thing. It is a video game. Obviously, like I can like people fly in here and have like powers and have like power-ups attributes, but it is telling a story based on this thing that happened and was real. And you can get to see this authenticity done right. And that's how you get like people interest, and you kind of raise awareness, and you and that's, I think that's the beauty of like entertainment or
Absolutely.
like video games, telling a story but like in a right way, you know.
Yeah,
So
yeah. For example, for me, it stands out because I know of the Sami people, but I'd love to play a game about them. It is one thing to read about them, getting informed about them, and another, fortunately, taking control of a character in their setting, in their culture. So that sounds super exciting. I believe that, and that's something that fortunately we can comment together, that there's interest on the consumer side, and many times the challenge is in the making of it. Especially, I believe there are challenges around the Latino studios. For example, the day one issue could be funding. Unfortunately, that is slowly changing. Maybe the tools are changing more rapidly. We're just mentioning how fortunately it is easier to do games, but they are still an expensive affair. So even though now there's an audience interested in these fresh settings informed by academic findings, how can we fund them? How can we actually day-to-day pay the bills before the game is shipped? I'm not sure if maybe, Gonzalo, you have some thoughts on this.
Oh, I have 10 million euros to give to the first person who calls. No, just kidding. But I wish. I think one of the good things about being able to make games is that, okay, I'm the oldest person in this conversation, so let me play my old card. I've been around for 50 years now, and what's cool now is that before you compare yourself with like AAA games, and now even if the indie scene got some sort of absorbed by the industry somehow, still you can get away with making a small game, and as long as it's good, that's fine. And it's just like a cartoon. I mean, you can do a graphic novel, but you can also do a 3-frame cartoon and hit it off and make an impact. So in that sense, if what you're offering, and sometimes it's even better because it can be a proof of concept, right? If what you're offering is something fresh, is something interesting. We game creators have the toughest challenge because a filmmaker, if you already paid your ticket or paid the subscription to Netflix or whatever, they already cashed in. Like you pay your ticket at the movie theater and you're there for 2 hours, and you can walk out, but probably you won't because you're just sitting there. But in games, we have like 5 minutes to try a game and figure out if it's challenging and learn the rules and see if it's interesting, and then we may buy it if it's free to play or if it's a demo. So it's really tough, but that's exactly what turned us also into de facto pedagogues, which is why I think because if you compare to traditional teachers, I mean, if I teach a class and I am a teacher, I may not see the consequences, good or bad, of my teaching like for decades on my students. But in a game, if I cannot persuade my players in an amount of minutes that I'm doing, that I'm teaching them how to do something interesting, I lost them forever. So so that's a big incentive for us to be good teachers, not just storytellers, not just game makers, but also good teachers.
That's a great thought, Gonzalo, that I really want to highlight, talking from a game dev perspective, because many of my colleagues, they still pursue the thought of build it and they will come, that the product is enough by itself. But we have to constantly think about the consumers. Unfortunately, there's so many good options that they have out there, so they won't wait very long until your game is really interesting. They won't play 2 hours, 3 hours, as I used to hear from some Final Fantasies back in the day. Oh, wait, in 5 hours it gets really good. Oh, players have so many options that we constantly have to think about how do we retain their attention. They are very busy. And I have the impression that particularly in our audience who are both Latinos who enjoy horror and enjoy history, and also international crowd, we have so many, fortunately, early adopters who are game academics, who study games like yourself and Eddie. How do we keep both of them interested? Because some things are more interesting for some audiences. I struggle and I recognize that, for example, many of the consumers here in Mexico, they don't like to read. Like many consumers elsewhere, that they just skip dialogues very quickly and they just want to play,
I
play,
skip
play, play,
dialogues.
play.
I don't want to read.
Yeah. So it is important, I believe, to understand this, because let's say myself as the writer, maybe I want to write something very long and complex, but no, I'm constantly thinking about, no, this is currently, let's say, the meta game, or how players are looking, they're looking to play. So we are constantly, let's say, making choices that are accessible for the players. We don't have long dialogues. We are more, let's say, character driven instead of text driven. So our protagonist, fortunately, she is La Malinche, and from a visual first impression, I am always telling the team we have to convey a lot from a first impression. She has her dress telling who she is. She's a Nahua. She collaborates with the Spanish, but she's not entirely Spanish. And this is I believe, what we have to do in the Latino market, because from a first impression, if you don't catch them, well, they will go to the next game or to the next movie or to the next entertainment piece. So in that sense, have you experienced a particular, fortunately, learning outcomes that have been impressive for you, thanks to, after retaining their attention, after completing such an impressive game with the big companies that you were mentioning before? Have you experienced a very good result with your serious games, with your past games? What's the potential? What can be achieved?
I think, this doesn't happen with all designers, but if you're trying to be a good designer, then you have to learn how to be humble, because everybody, to a certain degree, tries to make the games that we want to play, and a lot of people do, and they're awful, right? They're awful because they're tailor set for a person, a single person.
Yeah.
But if you try to be a good designer, then you listen and you watch people play, and you realize that yes, you have an interesting project, but not everything that you care about other people will care about, and so it becomes a dialogue. It becomes a dialogue where you have to sacrifice part of what you are passionate about in order to fulfill a larger vision. And that's what I like about video games, compared to, I mean, it happens to everything, but video games are basically machines where you test and you see how people react. I mean, not a lot of people do that with books, for example. People tend to think, okay, I wrote a book, I show it to a few editors and to my friends, and well, it's ready to ship. But I would be like, I just published a book, actually, a printed book, which is basically mainly online writing, which has been tested and rewritten, not to just to please people, but also because I learned stuff. I people pointed out interesting stuff, or questioning that, and I think that's part of the process of what we're doing. So you have to be a very, very good listener. You have to, just the process of testing. I mean, you just shut up, let people play, and don't interrupt them, and see if they figure it out, and trust your player also. I mean, trust. I mean, this is something also very similar to parenting. It's like, if you solve all the problems to your kids, then they won't learn, right? But as a parent, you're feeling for them and you want to help it, right? And that's kind of a like the challenge that you're facing. So it's it is a learning experience for the designer, for sure.
Yeah, great way to frame it as a parent. Yeah, you cannot solve all the problems of your child, of your player. That's a great way to put it. Now you have some thoughts too, Eddie, right? About how you have seen, fortunately, that academics, that big franchises work together. And fortunately, Gonzalo also has that experience. Maybe you want to comment, ask something about this, Eddie?
Honestly, I think that, well, I mean, like, just reflecting on like what we're trying to do with our game, right? Is that like, for example, on Dream of Darkness, like I think that what we're trying to do as Howard Games is that we believe, I think that and that I believe that you agree with me on this one, Javi, is like, in order like to tell better stories, I mean, like, games can be better, right? Like, but in order to tell these better stories, I mean, like, we need like fresh perspectives, like characters, story worlds, and I think that not only from like a design perspective, but also from a cultural and like a teamwork perspective, and like thinking, just reflecting on what you said, like about like you don't you don't probably will solve like all the problems, right? But like if you put like enough like perspectives into it, you do the research, you like listen, right, you can create something very fresh and unique. And I think that that's why we're talking, right? Because we believe that in this potential in the gaming industry.
Absolutely. In this sense, I believe that's something that fortunately together we're doing, and with the serious games industry, it has been something that I really appreciate, Gonzalo, the kind of work that you do and other game designers in the area, that the games by themselves are interesting, but even commenting around the game design ideas, the need for them, this reflection about what a game is, the needs of the player, how the player is different from the needs of the game designer. I believe that that's also valuable content. And on occasion, I feel that Latino game developers could be shy about sharing that fortunate knowledge, those good questions, because naturally we're going to get some things wrong. We're going to potentially ask some questions that others have already answered. And I have the impression that on occasion, my colleagues, game developers who are Latinos, can be shyer than colleagues from other places. I noticed that that is something that, fortunately, right now there is a demand. There is this demand that we mentioned in our podcast about diversity, about developers, fortunately, from other places, which perspectives they bring. But even though there's that demand, maybe on occasion it is ourselves, the game developers, who think, why should I talk about my ideas, my questions, or my fears around game design, about shipping a product, if the product should do all the talking? But no, I believe that fortunately, these discussions that we're having are valuable, but for a specific audience. I just watched, for example, Oppenheimer, and I adore history naturally. And it is a film by Nolan. It has all the marketing, all the big budget around it. And I have to recognize, even though I am, let's say, an early adopter of Nolan, I'm an early adopter of World War II history, I was only able to watch the movie. I don't have enough time to watch the trailer, to follow every development update. And I'm a big fan of the two, of the director of the period. So I believe that goes the same, even probably harder for indie games, because we don't have the budget that Nolan does, naturally. We have to at the same time have these discussions, share them, even though people are busy, even though people on the other side may be interested about our topics, but naturally have other things to do. So in this sense, Gonzalo, I wonder, how does Uruguay, if you have an experience, how does the Uruguay game scene handle this? Because I really admire that just on GDC, one of the booths there was Uruguay, and they were a very healthy ecosystem. There was no booth from Mexico, and we're a bigger supposedly market and gave them
Well,
Steve. So
maybe
what's
because there was a lot
happening?
of Mexicans also, because it's much easier to go there. I mean,
I'd
it
love to
could be.
hear.
Oh, well, I mean, Uruguay is 3.5 million people. So basically, you can fit, instead of Mexico City, you can fit all Uruguay just in a neighborhood. But that's the first thing. But it's also an advantage in the sense that from the very first day, we knew that that we had to create for an international audience because there was no a market big enough for us locally, and so that has its advantages. And also, well, I mean, there was support from the government for that booth, but I think one of the big challenges that I see in the last decade in game development, and especially in Latin America, is that it shifted from a seller's market to a buyer's market, just like what happened with music. So everybody now has a band, right? So it's cheap to hire a band, and everybody's making games, so it's cheap to hire game developers. It didn't used to be like that because it was a smaller group. And I'm not saying it's a problem. I mean, I'm just saying it's just a problem for the people who decide to make a living doing this, because it means that there are more games and it's more interesting, has more diversity. Just like you go to any bar and there's always a band there. They might not be very good, or yes, but well, they might not be well known. So in that sense, I do think, I mean, one of the challenges that we have, I'm not going to say as a culture, but well, in the continent, I think, is that, okay, do we bet on our local culture for making games? And as you were saying, I mean, are we going to just make like sombreros and maracas for the gringos, or we're doing something very realistic, but that only 25 people in my country will play it? It's like a trade-off. I mean, the same thing happens with films, but not as much with literature. Literature, even though the biggest writers, novelists from Latin America do have, or historically have dealt with certain topics, I think that they have more freedom than movie making, because it's cheaper to write. So to write than to make a movie. So I think the world, one of the good things about having so many options in entertainment is that if you make just another first-person shooter in space, you have to be a super genius to pull it out, because there's so many that all the permutations have been done so far, right? And again, I'm not saying that you have to do a stereotypical game or a very obscure game, but yes, there is a lot of we see that how the Japanese do it. I mean, there's a lot of Japanese culture in games that are not necessarily about ninjas and stuff, right? You see the culture permeating into the game experience. You see that also in German board games. Also, I mean, there is an identity to a certain degree, and well, I think we as creators, we have to find our own voices. We have to find our own topics, and I think there's a lot of specifically, for example, about the Mexica Empire. I mean, there's only a few TV series about it. I mean, there's the two on Cortez, and there's not that many globally.
No,
not content, and it's so rich. I mean, and not just the mythology. I mean, the history itself, or let's just talk about like urbanism or food, or well, the food maybe in Mexico has found its niche, but I think there's a lot of potential, but we have to negotiate. As I said, it's not just what makes us passionate that we'll be able to share with other people, and more importantly, as you were saying, and Eddie was saying at the beginning, I mean, you have to do your research. Yes, you have, but also knowing that you won't be able to make everybody happy. It's like when you write a book about your family, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you cannot say whatever about your family, because these are actual human beings. But at the same time, no matter what you say, there's gonna be somebody who's not gonna be happy about what you wrote, right?
Yeah.
So it's that balance, I think, that's very, very hard to pull out.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gonzalo. In that sense, I really want to highlight, you cannot make everybody happy. That is something that we really have to internalize, game designers, game directors, because naturally, since we are trying to sell to this international audience, like fortunately the Uruguay scene has done, we're constantly thinking about how can we really make this accessible, appealing? But it's still a balancing act, because if you just delude yourself seeing, oh, what's selling more is just this first-person shooter, so let's have a first-person shooter in the Aztec Empire, well, then you did it like, you overdid it, right? You became
Well, it could
too
still be.
generic.
It could still. I mean, the Assassin's Creed is the same formula, and yet you get to enjoy a lot and learn a lot of stuff, right? I mean, but if somebody said, let's make I don't know, more stereotypical thing. Let's make a game about Frida Kahlo. Say, okay, well, let's make a game about Frida Kahlo, but let's really get into it, right? Let's get really into all the weirdness and all the pain and all the messed up life she had. I mean, let's go all for it.
And the
Let's not just
surrealism.
right. I mean, let's not just get on it. It's gonna make a great cover and probably gonna get a lot of attention, but let's do it like it should be done, not just like
Absolutely. And no, it is not only, unfortunately, Latino developers, indie studios who are trying to make a product that stands out. Disney also has this experience, Cartoon Network, any big company right now is battling for that attention, creating the content that fortunately will stand out. And they are the ones who on occasion adapt Latino stories. There is in Netflix a show right now about the Maya, more for a young
that's
audience.
really good. I really like
exactly.
I love it. It's excellent.
Yeah. So fortunately, you've had the experience of collaborating with Disney, with Cartoon Network, and at the same time, I'd love to hear, how can you create a video game that fortunately still has a degree of your personal voice as a game designer, but still, I believe, following some guidelines that naturally with these brands you have to follow. How do you find this balance between these two directions, let's say?
And you know, just to build upon that, because I was thinking like, well, when I was like, well, I'm still like writing my dissertation, right? But like, and I remember that when I was like some months, years ago, I was like reading about, I'm playing also, and doing my research about this educational or like game that you made, September 12th, Gonzalo, and I was like really like into it and did a lot of like research, because also like, and because you mentioned Assassin's Creed, like basically researching that franchise and its transmedia and historical and cultural like properties, right? And like, speaking of balance, like just like, how do you balance, like from your perspective, like the artistic and entertainment aspects of game design, but with the educational goals when developing like a serious game, or a game that you want to put like your identity on, or like you want to show that its authenticity, you know? How do you balance that?
I think it's a very good question, and it has already been answered by Hollywood. You can't. Because
I mean, yeah, Black Panther, right? Like, also I was thinking
well,
of
no,
that when
I
you
mean,
said
even before that, I mean, in the early 20th century, I mean, the beginning of Hollywood, you start seeing people saying, okay, how do I balance a big industry with what I want to do, and it's very hard, and probably you can't. Except, I mean, there are a few exceptions, of course, some geniuses that get away with it, but you reach a lot of people, but you lose control. That's the equation. I mean, there's no magical, because the more people you reach, the more expensive the thing will be, and then and you're not putting your money into the game. You put just your life and your heart, but that doesn't count too much in capitalism. So I guess you cannot. But maybe it's because I'm just envious of people who manage to do it. I mean, there are of course some examples of AAA games that got away with pretty much everything. But also, I mean, one of the most fascinating things I keep asking myself this, and I've been asking this for a quarter century now, is the example of The Sims, because there's no other franchise, and they tried, a few people, but not as many, to do games about everyday life. I mean, we're still stuck in fantasy land. I mean, less than before, but still, I mean, if you think about it, and why is that? I mean, there's so much. I mean, if you look at if you go to Netflix, 90% of the, well, I wouldn't say 90%, but a big part of the movies are not like fantasy movies, right? And but we're still don't find fascinating or we find hard to simulate more common, traditional, everyday actions. And I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah,
So
great point. It is very related to, for example, in movies, we don't have necessarily every movie an action movie or a fantasy movie. We have slice of life, we have drama. I believe at least that's one of the factors that limits the genres or contents that we see on occasion in games. I believe that part of it is how we call games that are talking simulators. I believe that there's a slight degree of a pejorative sensation that you're doing a game that doesn't have a lot of gameplay, supposedly, in those kinds. So that kind of limits, I believe, but from the consumer, some of them do look for that genre specific, but I believe it limits the wealth of options in comparison with books, like you mentioned, with movies.
It depends. I mean, I'm a big fan of Firewatch, for example. Which it has a lot of text, even though it's audio, but still, I think they made an exceptional work with that game. So you also have to be really talented. I agree with your point, but I'm saying that some people have been able to find a workaround to that. And again, I'm just envious. I'm not that talented, right? Because everybody wants to pull out something so complex. But yeah, I agree with what you're saying.
And at the same time, I believe that fortunately, right now, naturally, with distribution via the internet, it is easier for very specific niches to find each other. For ourselves, studios creating a very particular kind of game. In our case, for example, something that has a degree of academic findings, of also horror, to find an audience who is also interested in that, even though we're not action-driven, even though we may not be the usual Japanese or American studio. There's a way to find each other. But we still have to find very actionable ways to cut through the noise without having the huge marketing budget that maybe other franchises have. So I wonder, Gonzalo, if you have noticed that there are particular ways that maybe studios in Uruguay, or maybe by working with big companies like we mentioned, have you found ways that, fortunately, the work that some developers do more easily finds that very specific audience who are interested in more informed games?
What I can tell you is not about games, it's about books. My office here in Montevideo is 3 blocks away from Mexican Embassy Cultural Center. So there's such a thing here in Montevideo where,
wow.
The Mexican government hosts like different Mexican speakers or art exhibits and stuff. And a friend of mine works there, and he was telling me that they invited, I don't remember her name, but a writer. She's a booktuber, a Mexican booktuber that started writing herself, and so they invited her here, and all the formal, the embassy, but also her publishing house, did a little bit of try to get some attention. But she was so popular with her base that they got like 10 times more people than they ever expected, right? So don't ask me, I'm too old. Ask the 12-year-old, the 14-year-olds. No, but I'm serious. I'm not just saying this to get a cheap laugh. I'm convinced. I mean, we have to ask to the passionate people who are online, who, as you said, I mean, you barely had the 3 hours, which is quite long, to watch Oppenheimer. You couldn't read all the lore around it, right?
Yeah.
Well, teenagers do have that time, and teenagers do have the keys, and they know places online that we have never threaded. So those are the people we have to ask. And I would not say that always, but many times they'll give you better tips than official marketing serious people.
But at the same time, it is very interesting what you mentioned about how there's this, let's say, collaboration between, in this case, the embassy and a YouTuber focused on books, booktuber. Sometimes, let's say, when we work with games, we each of us has, let's say, a paradigm of how they used to discover games. In my case, in my generation, for example, it may have been with trailers and with magazines. So many developers still continue thinking in the paradigm that they experienced when they discovered games, when they were younger. And on occasion, I believe that even myself as a game studio, I stopped paying attention about how today modern audiences are discovering these games. And it can be very surprising, like this very specific
It's called getting
intersection that
old.
you mentioned. It is. So
It happens to the best of
personally,
us.
yeah, personally, I believe that there's a huge potential with what our previous guest mentioned. She was from Twitch, and she mentioned that Spanish is right now the second bigger language in Twitch. So right now, fortunately, there are streamers who are covering these content creators who are covering games in our language in Spanish, and there's also this audience who maybe they are getting their smartphone a smartphone for the very first time. So there are more people getting online, and maybe we have to continue making these kinds of intersections that may not have happened before.
Get into
We
the
cannot
people.
wait.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Access
we
the
cannot.
people. I was just writing about the everybody's talking about the new Barbie movie, right? And
Sure.
it's about toys, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so that's our field, even though we might not seem the target audience. And it's interesting. I mean, how Mattel, which is a big corporation, is, from my point of view, I mean, what was arguing is that it's trying to present itself as a feminist take on Barbies, but Barbie is like the most historically the most conservative kind of doll ever.
Traditional, yeah.
And yes, they try to wash that thing with diversity, but they don't. They usually they make them a little bit smaller or a bit more roundy, but still it looks like Barbie, right? And what I'm saying, and that's something that in the corporate world is hard to. It's very easy to forget, and it's something that the corporations don't want you to know. Is that the question is not if we can adapt Barbie to our times and values. We can make our own dolls. We can make brand new dolls ourselves. I mean,
Yeah.
Barbie was just a woman who created that for her, right? Or her family. I mean, we can do the same. And the same thing applies to video games. It's like, yes, we can do dolls and they'll never be successful, or they may be a failure. Our games may suck, but we can still do it. And that's something that in the history of humankind, toys and games were made in-house for most of our existence. In-house or were founded objects like rock or so let's not forget that. I mean, there's power in creation, and we don't have to adapt a gringo doll that does definitely look like 99% of people on the planet.
Yeah.
We don't have to adapt. Let's make more dolls, and it doesn't have to be one.
Sure.
I mean, Mattel benefits to have a single brand, but we don't care.
Yeah.
We don't make money with them, so let's do that.
Absolutely. From a, let's say, entrepreneurial perspective, it absolutely makes a lot of sense. At the same time, I have the impression that there's, let's say, a cognitive limitation. Maybe this is too, let's say, crazy about my theory, but people have, let's say, a limit. They have attention spans. They have a limit of the amount of faces, companies, of so many things that they can follow, that they can recognize. And that's why I believe right now I hear so often that, oh my God, this actor who is Mexican and was in the Marvel movie, he said this. And when I see the content, like the quote, it is fairly simple, like just trust yourself and things will happen. But it came from that source that, well, consumers understand, know, follow, recognize. So more and more, I believe that we have to find the way so that, yeah, our original message definitely comes through. We have to create these original messages, franchises, contents, but at the same time, I believe anchor them with something that
we have to negotiate. We negotiate with power. Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, I used to work in a company called Dragon Box, which was acquired by Kahoot. And I remember when the acquired offer arrived, what we're thinking is that Kahoot has hundreds of millions of users. I mean, our products are more sophisticated in the pedagogical sense, and Dragon Box at the time. Well, let's get together and try. And in this sense, it totally makes sense for us to do that. And I think it was a great decision. And I'm really happy to be working with Kahoot, inventing new stuff now. but of course, I would not do that with any company or any other company. So you have to negotiate, and again, you want a big impact. Well, you have to see who you're tagging along, who you're making a partnership with. It's not I mean, the internet made things easier to distribute, but of course we tend to forget that still the structures of power, the big money companies are still controlling most of the attention of global audiences. But I think you can fit into the cracks, and if you have something, I mean, having something good doesn't guarantee to be a success, but it definitely helps, because most of the stuff also available is just like procedural.
And like talking about that, because you mentioned like that you heard like a quote and it becomes famous because it comes from this Mexican artist or actor or whatever, and mostly just like thinking about like Latin representation and in entertainment or gaming or tech. Like I just wonder, like as a game designer and researcher, like how do you perceive the current representation of Latinos in whether like gaming industry or tech or even educational? Like I don't know if there are some areas that you consider that still require some improvement, or if you consider that there's still like progress to be made, when it comes to these topics.
If the question is for me, I can answer, but I don't know if it's for Javier too. No, that's fine.
It definitely is.
I mean, I do have a problem with the whole Latino category because it's an American-made category, so it makes sense within their culture. Yeah, this may be provocative or not. I don't know, but I do feel more Latin American in the sense that as a dialogue between different cultures that were united not just by the content, but also by a common parts of a common history, and so the sense of having like being able to unite all Latinosness into a single like representation is highly problematic. But I do think, and even as I was problematizing Barbie, I do think that it's better to have dolls and toys with different skin colors, for example, even if it's just a very superficial thing. And it's great to be able to see somebody who thinks like you, who shares common stuff on games. There's always, I think we will get there when we get used to it. Like, for example, Mexico used to have an extremely powerful cinema industry, right? And on TV, there's still, I mean, it's not the same, but for a while also. So it's, if we arrive to a moment where if you go to watch like a Hollywood movie and then you go to watch a local movie or even a movie that was made in specific your city or your neighborhood, or just watch a video about an influencer who lives next door, and you just combine everything and it feels organic, I think that's when that's like the utopia. But definitely, and it's also very hard because, well, I mean, it's a complex situation. I remember at GTA, there was a big controversy because there was a gang called the Haitians, and there was one phrase in the game that was like, "Let's go and kill the Haitians." And out of context, it looked like a genocide call for Haiti, right?
Wow.
And there was a lot of people complaining about that, and of course, online discussions. Of course, we know how they can definitely be fueled. But I think people should be able to find themselves on people from their same culture and from very different cultures, right? I mean, that's the trade-off. I don't have a solution, but I think we have to work in both. But because it's not just okay, I'm a Latino guy, I'm just gonna consume like Latino culture stuff. Like, no, I just want to play a Inuit guy because
awesome. Absolutely. In that sense, it is a great question, Eddie, and also a very interesting answer, Gonzalo, because I believe as a startup founder, as the founder of our studio, that we have to play the game, even though we recognize the subtleties, like you well described, Gonzalo. Myself, I describe myself first like a person. I don't use the term, let's say, Latino in my day-to-day consuming in my day-to-day what I am looking for. I will look first for entertainment, for books, for games that are good, not necessarily that they absolutely have to be from a particular place, a particular culture. At the same time, funding, views, marketing flows right now into the term Latino. And it
Right.
is smart, let's say, from a perspective for so many indie founders that don't have the huge marketing budgets
Oh, we cannot
to,
ignore it. I mean, the category we
yeah,
cannot
to
ignore it.
anchor
Right.
themselves into that. Fortunately, let's say so many of us, I believe every Latin American understands the differences between ourselves. I mean, Uruguay and Argentina, I will
Yeah.
always say we're different, right?
Well,
Fortunately.
Uruguayans we say they're different. Argentinians don't care because everybody knows them. We are like we're
Uh,
always making sure that people understand the subtleties. We're not that
of
different.
course, of
We,
course.
we only better at soccer, but well, that's it.
And maybe in wine too. Yeah, of course. And every Latino, fortunately, is very proud about who we are specifically, and also the mixture of our respective cultures.
Mhm.
But that tragically doesn't always, let's say, there's not enough room in the attention starved audience, in the tweet, in the TikTok for that sometimes to come across. So fortunately, we can just use the thumbnail, the term Latino in order to catch the attention in this very competitive modern internet age. And then fortunately explore the subtleties that fortunately each of our contents can then provide. Because at the moment, fortunately, I believe that game creators, there are always people who enjoy expressing this uniqueness, this craft, fortunately, that we have. So we are reaching our 1 hour time mark, and I can see Eddie paying close attention as he is wise to the clock. Maybe some closing remarks. What do you guys have in mind? Thanks to this very rich, informative dialogue.
You know,
Uh,
just some thoughts that I wanted to like discuss with you. But yeah, I actually was not paying that close attention. I was like really into the conversation. But yeah, I'm looking at the time because uh we don't want to take like too much of your time, Gonzalo. But I just like had in mind like how games can be used as a platform, and because it's something that we're trying to do, you know, like but to address uh social issues, but also like raise awareness in history and promote like a positive like representation of culture, history, Latinos, and other underrepresented groups or communities, you know, just like the Aztecs, Mexicas, and all of these like stories that like not many people like will know outside of, I don't know, America in general. You know,
not,
just like
not many people are aware that we have a 3,000-year-old culture
yeah,
next to countries with just a couple hundred years, right?
yeah,
So I
Yeah,
think that's the core
absolutely.
message. I mean, that I was
Yeah.
not told in school. I was told about the Spaniards, but I discovered myself like Peruvian and to talk about the natural empires and Mayan
Inca, yeah, the
yeah,
Maya, the
the
Mexica.
culture by myself, right?
yeah. There are like many stories there. The Pipil also, but like from Central America, and many that exist. But I because like I just think that fiction or like art, uh, or like a work of art or like a work of a piece of entertainment can be used like as a platform, you know. And
Right. No,
that's
I agree. I totally agree. What I think, and let's sum up then the conversation with this, if you don't mind, because I also have another appointment. I'm sorry to say, but I think what makes games unique is that they're not just a story. There are laboratories where you can experiment, where you can test boundaries, where you can see what will happen if I do this, what will happen if I do that. and about history. It's totally fine if I put like zombies into another historical setting. It's fine because let's experiment. Let's play. I mean, play means, and that's also why games and learning are so together, because it's a cognitive strategy to and possible versions of ourselves. I could play as somebody else. I could play in a different gender, in a different nationality, a different age. So hopefully, if the game is good, it's gonna send me back some reflections that I was not expecting, and I may learn not just something about another culture, but also something about myself. And I think that's the great power of games. That, and that they're also fun. So that's in general.
Fortunately,
I mean,
yeah.
it's good. It's good also to do all that while enjoying yourself. But also, I mean, it's not just fun. I mean, if you watch somebody playing, I mean, there's a lot of cursing, a lot of frustration, but the overall experience, I think, is enriching, and that's what I meant.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Gonzalo, Eddie, and everyone listening to us. Which kind of experiments would you love that people run now in games with these new tools, with the opportunity to not only have fun, but also to depict the new settings that we're mentioning? Please share them with us. We're very happy to read you in the comments. Thank you again, Gonzalo, for your time.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah,
And
thank you again for joining.
Eddie, for making this happen. And we'll see you around soon for our next episode of Latino Game Changers. Stay tuned.